The engine screamed so violently that the entire race paddock went silent. Then, before hundreds of spectators could understand what had happened, the rebuilt car rolled to a stop just inches from the pit wall, its hood trembling from the force of the final turn. The owner of the team stared at the car in disbelief, because only 3 days earlier he had refused to pay the single father who rebuilt it. He had called the man desperate, inexperienced, and replaceable. Now the fastest drivers in the country were refusing to sit behind its wheel. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change a person's life, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can keep bringing you stories that remind us never to underestimate someone simply because they are struggling. The single father standing beside that silent race car was named Callum Reed, a 36-year-old mechanic who had learned long ago that life rarely rewarded people for doing the right thing. Callum had once been considered one of the most gifted performance mechanics in his region, but after his wife passed away following a sudden illness, his priorities changed overnight. He stopped chasing prestigious racing teams and began raising his 8-year-old daughter, Elsie, on his own. He worked from a small rented garage behind an ordinary repair shop, fixing brakes, transmissions, engines, and whatever else customers could afford to bring him. His hands were permanently marked by grease and tiny scars, while his old work boots had been repaired so many times that Elsie joked they had survived more races than any driver. Callum never complained about his circumstances in front of his daughter. He wanted Elsie to believe that being poor was not the same as being powerless, and that honest work was never something to be ashamed of. But lately, even honest work had become difficult. The rent on their tiny apartment had increased, school expenses were piling up, and the repair shop had fewer customers than ever. Callum was behind on several bills, yet every morning he still packed Elsie's lunch, checked her homework, walked her to school when his schedule allowed, and then spent the day working until his back ached. His opportunity arrived unexpectedly when a famous regional racing team called North Star Velocity brought him a wrecked prototype after their regular engineering crew failed to restore it. The car had been built for a major daytime endurance race that could determine whether the struggling team would receive a lucrative manufacturer partnership. Its chassis had survived, but the suspension geometry was badly damaged, the engine had suffered internal stress, and the electronic control system had been partially destroyed. Several specialists had already examined it and concluded that rebuilding it before the race was practically impossible. Callum looked at the wreckage for less than 10 minutes before seeing something nobody else had noticed. The frame was not as damaged as they believed. The real problem was hidden deeper inside the suspension mounts, where microscopic distortion had changed the car's balance. He explained that the car could be rebuilt, but only if someone stopped treating it like a machine assembled from expensive parts and started treating it like a living system where every component had to work in harmony. The team's owner, Grant Hollis, was impressed enough to give him a chance, but only because desperation had left him with few alternatives. Grant was wealthy, proud, and accustomed to being obeyed. He had spent years building North Star Velocity and believed success belonged to people with money, connections, and authority. He did not understand Callum's quiet confidence. To Grant, Callum was simply a temporary mechanic who had been lucky enough to get an opportunity. For 11 long days, Callum worked from morning until late afternoon, rebuilding the car almost piece by piece. He refused to take shortcuts. He measured the suspension repeatedly, rebuilt the damaged steering system, balanced the drivetrain, and personally rewired the electrical system. When one expensive component arrived with a manufacturing defect, he stayed calm instead of blaming anyone. When another mechanic told him the engine was finished, Callum opened it himself and found a tiny flaw that could have destroyed the entire car during a race. Elsie sometimes sat on an old stool near the garage entrance after school, doing her homework while her father worked. She watched him with the admiration children reserve for the people who make them feel safe. One afternoon, she noticed that Callum was rubbing his wrist in pain and quietly placed a bottle of water beside him. He smiled at her and promised he was fine, even though he knew the truth was more complicated. He desperately needed the money from the job, and he was afraid that admitting how much the work mattered to him would make him look weak. By the final day, the impossible car was ready. It looked almost identical to the machine that had arrived as twisted metal, but Callum knew every vibration it could make. When the engine finally roared during the first daytime test, the sound echoed through the paddock and brought everyone running. The car accelerated smoothly, turned sharply, and stopped with remarkable stability. The engineers stared at their data screens. The numbers were better than anyone had expected. For the first time, Grant Hollis looked at Callum with something close to respect. But that respect disappeared when the bill arrived. Callum had calculated the agreed labor payment carefully. He was not asking for charity. He was asking for the money he had earned. That payment would cover several overdue bills, Elsie's school expenses, and enough groceries to give them breathing room for a few weeks. Grant looked at the invoice and frowned. He claimed the work had taken too long. He argued that Callum had been given access to expensive equipment and that the team had supplied the parts. Then he offered him less than half the agreed amount. Callum stood quietly, staring at the figure, before reminding Grant that the agreement had been clear from the beginning. Grant refused to change his decision. He told Callum that if he wanted to complain, he could take the matter to court, but the team had already moved on. Then, in front of several employees, he accused Callum of being lucky to have been allowed inside a professional racing garage at all. Callum's face burned with humiliation, but he did not shout. He simply folded the unpaid invoice, placed it into his pocket, and walked away. The hardest part came when Elsie asked him that afternoon whether they could finally buy the science kit she had been saving for. Callum looked at his daughter and realized he could not afford it. He told her they would find another way, and Elsie smiled bravely even though she understood more than he wanted her to. The story might have ended there if not for the car. The following morning, North Star Velocity brought the rebuilt machine to the track for its final driver evaluation. Several professional racers arrived, each eager to prove themselves before the championship event. The team expected the rebuilt car to become their greatest advantage. Instead, one driver climbed out after a single lap. Another lasted 2 laps. A third refused to drive it at all. The engineers were confused. The car was not failing mechanically. Its numbers were exceptional. Its acceleration was extraordinary. Yet every experienced driver described the same strange sensation: the car responded differently at the limit. It demanded precision. It punished hesitation. It felt unpredictable to anyone who tried to force it instead of understanding it. Grant became furious. He blamed the engineers. He blamed the drivers. He blamed the car itself. Then the team's youngest test driver, Everett Shaw, made an observation that changed everything. He said the car was not unstable. It was honest. It was revealing every mistake the driver made. Grant dismissed him, but Everett insisted on another test. Halfway through the afternoon run, the car entered a fast corner and suddenly lost grip. Everett corrected it, but the steering wheel shook violently. He brought the car back to the garage and told the engineers there was something wrong with the alignment under load. They checked everything. Nothing appeared wrong. Then someone finally remembered Callum's original notes. He had warned them that the car's behavior depended on a specific suspension calibration that only made sense when the chassis reached racing temperature. Without his final adjustment, the car would feel wrong despite appearing perfect on a stationary inspection. Grant's pride made him hesitate. But the championship was only days away. So he sent someone to find Callum. They discovered him working beneath an old pickup truck at his small garage while Elsie sat nearby reading a schoolbook. When the team representative explained the problem, Callum initially refused to return. He had already been humiliated once. He did not want to stand in front of the same people who had refused to pay him. Then Elsie looked at him and quietly reminded him that he had always said a person's character was measured by what they did when nobody treated them fairly. Callum closed his toolbox. He went back. At the track, he did not ask Grant for an apology. He did not demand his money. He simply walked around the car, checked the tires, inspected the suspension, and listened to the engine. After several minutes, he found the problem. A tiny adjustment made during the team's final preparation had altered the geometry just enough to destroy the balance Callum had carefully built into the machine. He corrected it. The car returned to the track. This time, Everett drove it through the difficult corner smoothly. The data improved immediately. Everyone watching realized the truth. Callum had rebuilt not only a damaged race car, but a machine whose performance depended on details most people never understood. Grant stood silently. For the first time, he seemed ashamed. The next morning, Grant found Callum outside the garage with Elsie. Instead of sending another employee, he walked over himself. He admitted that he had deliberately withheld Callum's payment because he believed a struggling mechanic would accept whatever amount he offered. He admitted that his arrogance had blinded him to the value of Callum's work. Most importantly, he apologized without excuses. Then he handed Callum the full payment, along with additional compensation for the work performed after the original agreement. Callum accepted the money, but he did not immediately forgive him. He told Grant that the money mattered, but the disrespect had hurt more. He explained that people who struggle financially are often treated as though they have less dignity than people with wealth. He could forgive a mistake, but he wanted Grant to understand why the mistake had mattered. Grant listened. Then he told Callum that he understood. The championship race arrived under a bright afternoon sky. Crowds filled the grandstands. The North Star car sat at the starting line, gleaming under the sunlight. Everett was behind the wheel, but before climbing into the cockpit, he asked Callum to place his hand on the roof of the car. Callum smiled and did. The race began. The car moved through the opening laps with remarkable speed. Other drivers tried to pass, but Everett remained patient. He trusted the machine. He remembered Callum's philosophy: never fight the car, understand it. Lap after lap, the rebuilt machine climbed through the rankings. Then, during the final section of the race, a competitor attempted an aggressive pass. Everett avoided the collision, but the maneuver forced him wide and cost valuable seconds. The crowd believed North Star had lost its chance. But Everett stayed calm. The car responded exactly as Callum had designed it to respond. It carried speed through the final sequence of corners and crossed the finish line first by less than a second. The entire North Star team erupted in celebration. Grant did not run toward the trophy. He walked straight toward Callum. In front of everyone, he thanked the mechanic who had saved the team when nobody else believed the car could be rebuilt. Then Grant publicly acknowledged that Callum had earned every dollar he was initially denied. But the greatest reward came several weeks later. Grant offered Callum a permanent position as chief restoration engineer, with a salary that would allow him to give Elsie a better home and a secure future. Callum accepted, but only after negotiating something Grant had never expected. He asked the team to create a paid apprenticeship program for mechanics who had talent but lacked money, connections, or prestigious backgrounds. Grant agreed. Months later, the old garage behind the repair shop was transformed into a training center supported by North Star Velocity. Young mechanics who had once believed professional racing was reserved for wealthy families now had a place to learn. Callum became the person they came to when they felt invisible. Elsie visited him one afternoon after school and saw her father teaching a group of young mechanics how to rebuild a suspension system. She noticed the same grease on his hands, but there was something different in his face. He was no longer simply surviving. He was building something. A future for his daughter. A second chance for people like him. A community where talent mattered more than status. And the race car that had once been rejected by every driver eventually became the team's most successful machine. But Callum never called it his greatest achievement. He said his greatest achievement was teaching Elsie that being treated unfairly did not give you permission to become cruel, that forgiveness did not mean forgetting, and that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the person capable of rebuilding what everyone else has already given up on. Before the story ends, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe Callum's greatest victory was: rebuilding the car, winning the race, forgiving Grant, or creating opportunities for others. Your answer might remind someone else that their hardest chapter does not have to become their final chapter. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes the people who are refused a fair chance become the very people who create second chances for everyone else.